Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Tales of Herding Gods based on novel. So let's start. Qin Mu instantly became excited. He had been researching about sword spirits the last few days, but he hadn't advanced by much. He kept on feeling that there was a lot to learn and not enough time. It was rare for him to meet a sword skill expert like Luo Yinyu from West Earth, so he naturally had to ask her for advice. The two of them discussed his problems in detail, and both of them reaped great benefits. West Earth's sword skills used spirits to wield their swords, which increased their power drastically, nearly doubling it. In Qin Mu's eyes, the sword skills of West Earth were somewhat lacking in excitement and far less intricate compared to those of Eternal Peace Empire. Even Luo Yinyu, the sword skill expert, was inferior when compared to the attainments of sword skills of numerous sects in Middle-earth. Yet the sword spirit could raise the power of her sword moves to a level that the experts of Middle-earth could only yearn for. When she executed basic sword skills, every move and every form overflowed with awe-inspiring power which had been raised drastically. There was a heroic air that made others not dare to face it directly. Luo Yinyu saw the extraordinary points that the reform in Middle-earth had brought. The sword skills there were treacherous and had numerous variations. She was especially wary of them after seeing the 4 basic sword forms founded by Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and the one by Qin Mu. They gave the sword skills even more changes and variation, providing them with countless possibilities. Luo Yinyu tried using spiral sword form, coil sword form, drill sword form, and the 18th form Qin Mu had founded. She pondered over them, then said, "Something is strange. The first 14 basic sword forms of Middle-earth are no different from my West-earth, however, what concerns these 4 moves, even though they are also basic sword skills, the further one cultivates them, the more magic power they would require. It's especially obvious with the basic sword form founded by Cult Master Qin, since executing it one time will nearly exhaust half of my cultivation. If the 19th form is founded, won't it completely exhaust the cultivation of sword skill divine arts practitioners? When you reach the 20th sword form, will anyone even be able to execute it?" Qin Mu's heart trembled violently, and he had the feeling of having found his soulmate. His gaze became fervent. "You can also feel the 19th sword form." Luo Yinyu looked at him with delight. "You too feel it?" The two of them looked at each other and smiled knowingly. "After I founded the 18th form, I felt a wish to continue." Qin Mu became perturbed, and he said everything on his mind. "At that time, I could still feel that there was a 19th form. At that time, I felt that there could very well be a 19th sword form. However, I was fighting with Sister E then, so I didn't dare to be distracted, so I didn't perform an in-depth investigation to the source of this feeling. However, the 19th sword form definitely exists. You also felt a 19th sword form, so that means that my feeling wasn't wrong." Luo Yinyu nodded. "The 19th sword form could be the crux for us to enter the sword path directly." The two of them grew excited. "That reminds me, Eternal Peace Empire is clearly close to the sea, so why do you refer to it as Middle-earth?" Qin Mu inquired. Luo Yinyu shook her head. "I don't understand much about the stuff outside since most of the time I'm concentrating on comprehending the sword." At the side, Chief Fang Kadi of Fang family smiled and said, "Cult Master Qin, the name Middle-earth had always been around. It's to address the land of great ruins and the East. The East Sea near your Eternal Peace Empire is then called East-earth." The two youths stayed together to research sword skills and exchange ideas, attracting quite a number of people to observe. Qin Mu and Luo Yinyu were great masters in sword skills, and even though there were people whose cultivation realm surpassed them, they could only exclaim in admiration on the side. Qin Mu was quite puzzled by the words. "East Sea has no land, so why is it addressed as East Earth?" Fang Kadi hadn't looked deep into this marvel and thus could only shake her head. "This I do not know. East Sea was once land, so it was addressed as East Earth," Chief Fu Yinshi of Fu family said. "In the Cloud Book of our Fu family, we have recorded matters regarding East and Middle Earths. It was written there that Middle Earth and East Earth are not divided by the current geography, but accordingly to the geography of long, long ago." Qin Mu's heart beat an extra time, and he suddenly thought of Bent Mountain Shrine. It had been erected on a majestic mountain which had sunk into the bottom of East Sea. The shrine was 5,000 yards below the sea surface. The bottom of the mountain was even farther from the sea surface. This meant that the East Sea had originally been a land that was known as East Earth. However, Fu Yunxi said that East Earth and Middle Earth were divided by the geography from a long time ago. That should have been even before founding Emperor era, when it was High Emperor era. High Emperor era should have belonged to East Earth, right? It is the East Sea now. The third move of sword picture is Calamity of High Emperor. It should probably be related to High Emperor era. Qin Mu sunk into deep thoughts. Sword picture had moves that village chief had founded, and Calamity of High Emperor was the third move of sword picture. In that case, village chief should have understood a part of High Emperor era's history. Village chief, I will definitely go to Fengdu to save you. The youth secretly made a firm resolution. Suddenly, his loud voice reached him. We are almost at True Heaven Palace. Everyone, on guard. Swordmaster Luo Yinyu immediately got up and walked toward Luo family. Fu Yushi, Fang Kadi, Mu Yingxue, and Liu Ruian all returned to the armies of their family. Qin Mu stood at the city tower, looking ahead with a trembling heart. He saw magnificent mountains standing in great numbers like silent 3,000 yards tall giants which existed between the heaven and earth. The mountains were similar to the giant Qin Mu had encountered near Fragrant Bloom City, just even larger and even more dangerous. Beside them were also sword peaks that were mountain peaks like swords. There were also bell peaks that resembled bells. Cauldron peaks that were shaped like cauldrons. Pagoda peaks that were shaped like pagodas. Building peaks that were like multi-storied buildings. All those mountain peaks were spirit weapons of all kinds and forms. Besides them, there was a long river under the mountain that surged at a great speed through 9 bends and 18 curves. There was also a rainbow waterfall pouring down 10,000 yards. A sea of clouds could be faintly discernible in the sky, in which thunder and lightning flashed together. In the sea of clouds, a cluster of palaces seemed to be bathed in golden light. They were West Earth's True Heaven Palace. The sacred ground of West Earth was much harder to deal with than Qin Mu had imagined. Qin Mu raised his head to look at the palaces in the sky from which many women flying out. They landed on the mountain peaks. True Heaven Palace should have long ago received news that Qin Mu had gathered some of the big influential families and gotten ready for their approach. Bang! A huge mountain peak suddenly exploded and countless rocks flew in all directions while others rolled down its sides. The mountain peak had suddenly changed into a majestic giant. It squatted down and pulled out his huge legs from the ground, shaking it endlessly. He raised her hand, and the huge bamboo city came to a stop. The mountain giant before them gradually stood. Its huge palm was the size of 100 fields, and as it streaked across the sky, violent wind howled. The palm then suddenly grabbed a sword-shaped mountain peak. Piercing sounds rang out when the sword-shaped mountain peak was actually pulled out from the ground by the mountain giant. Rocks rolled and fell in directions when he did that. By the time the mountain giant raised the sword, the earth and rocks over it had already completely fallen off, revealing a rusty item inside. It was a huge mountain peak sword. Qin Mu's face became solemn when he looked at the huge sword and mountain giant through the barely discernible fog. True Heaven Palace's background was too immense and even surpassed that of the sacred grounds of Middle Earth. No matter if it was Tao Sect or Great Thunderclap Monastery, or even Heavenly Devil Cult, they didn't have such terrifying backgrounds. Bang, bang. Huge explosions rang out, and mountains changed while forests became giants that were thousands of yards tall. They grabbed weapons of unimaginable size. They were the guardians of True Heaven Palace. Numerous disciples of True Heaven Palace stood on the shoulders or the heads of the mountain giants, racing up and down with the movement of their creatures while overflowing with murderous intent. Qin Mu took a look at Mu Yingxue. If she hadn't poisoned Xiong family, Yu family would have found it very difficult to seize True Heaven Palace and snatch the authority of Xiong family. Just the mountain giants alone were an incomparably terrifying power that surpassed an army of 1,000,000. Get into formation! He shouted loudly, and the women of He family in the city walked out. Each of them took out a formation flag which swayed in the wind. Instantly, numerous spirit weapons for formation skills fell out from the formation flags. The women of He family quickly assembled them, and Qin Mu saw an extremely shocking sight. The divine arts practitioners of He family were actually using spirit weapons for formation skills to assemble catapults that were 300 yards high. They were erected upright behind Bamboo City, and the winches whirled to tighten. The divine arts practitioners of Fang family executed their divine arts, and rocks rolled down non-stop from the mountain giants behind them. They combined into huge rock lumps that automatically rolled into the huge frames of the catapults. Countless female divine arts practitioners of She family scattered seeds which grew frantically throughout the mountain, forming a sea of green. It surged continuously as tree giants rose and strode forth. Swordmaster Luo Inu raised her swords, and swishing sounds rang in the air as tens of thousands of women of Luo family pulled out their swords as well. All of them were filled with heroism. Fu family's sister. Mu Yingxue suddenly shouted. Fu Yunxi gave an order, and the divine arts practitioners of Fu family summoned dark clouds. They formed a sea of clouds, covering an area of 1,000 miles. As lightning flashed and thunder boomed, incomparably thick tornadoes formed up. However, they twisted their bodies but didn't advance as they were controlled by the divine arts practitioners of Fu family. Mu Yingxue advanced with the divine arts practitioners of Mu family and threw all the highly toxic poisons they had into the wind. The tornadoes sucked them into the dark clouds and changed in color, becoming a bewitching green. Even the flashing lightning had a touch of green to its light. The entire cloud layer was filled with Mu family's deadliest poison. Violent wind surged from behind a youth at the city tower, fluttering his clothes. The wind was chilly, bringing away the excess heat from his body. His blood was running too hot. The female divine arts practitioners created a totally different atmosphere on the battlefield compared to the men of eternal peace, but it made his blood boil just the same. Women were a match for the men. Even though they were charming beauties, they were also strong warriors on the battlefield. The atmosphere was somber and desolate. The front of True Heaven Palace was overflowing with austere air. The black clouds that wanted to ravage the city were kept under control, with only the sound of the wind being audible. That kind of pressure could make one go mad. At that moment, a figure flew out from the palaces in the sea of clouds and past the mountain giants who ignored it. Bago. The faces of He, Mu Yingxue, Fu Yuni, and the rest changed slightly. They didn't show any cowardice when facing the mountain giants of True Heaven Palace, but when they caught sight of the figure flying at them, their expressions changed. He gave a soft shout, and Bamboo City split apart. Countless rocks floated into the air and quickly formed a defensive formation to protect the disciples of He family behind her. She herself was lifted up by one rock to float before her formation. Suddenly, there was one more person beside her. It was Qin Mu. Warmth flooding He's heart. Sword spirit celestial soldiers. Luo Inu shouted out, and the tens of thousands of female divine arts practitioners of Luo family raised their weapons with qi. Countless flying swords clanked and floated into the sky, transforming into a huge sword formation. Although the blades were numerous in numbers and seemed to be flying here and there, they were not messy at all. 8 pillars heaven. Fang Kadi shouted out, and the mountain giants behind her suddenly formed huge circular pillars that were able to support both heaven and earth. 8 mountain giants went forward and pulled the pillars out to carry on their shoulders while overflowing with murderous intent. Other families also executed their moves while watching the figure coming closer with nervousness. Even Liu Ruian and Liu Zhenqing were full of worry. They came to the front of the golden god coffin, ready to release the corpse within it any time. Qin Mu's heart trembled. Just Bago alone had pushed all of the influential families in West Earth to the brink of taking out all of their trump cards. At the sight of it, he couldn't help admitting that Bago was indeed awe-inspiring. How can this man with the surname Yu from high heavens make all the families in West Earth worry so, as if they are about to face a great enemy? Qin Mu couldn't help being bewildered. There weren't as many sects in West Earth as in Eternal Peace, and they were mainly ruled by influential families. The abilities of the 10 at the top were no small matter, and all of them were extraordinary in some way. Not to mention, if a guest of high heavens, even if a god came down, the families shouldn't have to be so careful. Bago was definitely not just simply a guest of high heavens. Yet when the figure got close enough, Qin Mu realized that Bago wasn't fiendish looking like he had imagined. Instead, he was a man with an unordinary appearance. His build was tall and sturdy while his features were very handsome. The clothes he wore were made from an unknown material that draped. Every strand seemed to have been weaved by runes, and from time to time, an indiscernible light would emerge from the strands. His clothes were very fitting and showed that he didn't have any excess flesh. His dressing was that of a man from West Earth, with a white cloth wrapped around his head and golden chains crisscrossing over it. However, unlike other men, he had few other accessories. His nose bridge was high, but his gaze was gentle, giving a pleasant feeling to people who saw him for the first time. When Qin Mu laid eyes on him, he felt that the man looked pretty similar to Jade, sovereign of high heavens. Qin Mu had once taken a look at the corpse of that man who was said to be a perfect man. Even though he had been killed by Emperor Yang Feng, his appearance had remained extraordinary. His temperament seems to be similar to that of Xu Shenghua. Qin Mu examined him and was quite shocked. He actually felt that Bago's bearing was also somewhat similar to that of Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. Xu Shenghua's bearing was of everything in the world having nothing to do with him. He had entered the mortal realm from above and worldly affairs couldn't taint him. This was also related to the technique he cultivated. Even though Qin Mu had pulled Xu Shenghua down to the mortal realm, the worldly affairs still found it difficult to change that outstanding youth. He still looked like he could abandon them anytime and leave. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, on the other hand, looked cold and was serious in speech and manner. It was a kind of invincible attitude of looking at all the smaller mountains down below after having ascended the highest one. He was a great master who had extraordinary achievements and who only had change and reform in his heart. All other ways of the world had been thrown away, and any hindrance to his reform was only stumbling blocks. He would execute lightning-fast methods to get rid of each one of them. Bago from high heavens actually had Xu Shenghua's temperament and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's bearing at the same time. Chief He. The man with the embroidered headband flew over and greeted He and the rest. Chief Mu, Chief Liu, Chief Fan. Even though they were enemies, everyone returned his greeting. Bago. The man in the embroidered headband looked at Qin Mu, revealing his teeth as he smiled before greeting him. Human Emperor Qin. Qin Mu's heart shook as he returned the greeting. Bago. May I ask, how does Bago know about such a small and negligible existence as I? Human Emperor Qin, there's no need for you to be unduly humble, the man in the embroidered headband said. I'm always paying attention to the human emperors of the successive generations. For the previous human emperor, I even personally came down to the lower bound. You should have seen how his 4 limbs look like, right? He stretched out his hand in a grabbing motion, and a woman of Mu family couldn't prevent herself from flying in front of him. She tried to struggle, but it was in vain. The man in the embroidered headband pulled out his sword, and a severed arm fell off. He gently waved his hand with a smile, and the severed arm flew toward Qin Mu. Cult Master Qin, please take a look. The corners of Qin Mu's eyes twitched as his vital qi flooded out to examine the wound in detail. His brow wrinkled, and he croaked, the exact same sword wound. It was me. The man in the embroidered headband smiled warmly at him. Looks like he didn't hide the sword wounds from you. Behind the killing formations of all the influential families, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Xiong Xiu were hiding, not getting close. However, when Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor saw the sword light of the man in the embroidered headband, his expression changed drastically and he lost his composure. Crap! I know the origin of this Bago. Quickly, all the influential families of West Earth should retreat. Xiong Xiu shook her head. The arrow is already in the bowstring, and there's no choice but to release it. We couldn't retreat now even if we wanted. Why did Imperial Preceptor suddenly lose his composure? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor took in a long breath as his eyes flashed. I recognize this sword skill, this sword path. It's the sword skill that cut off old human emperor's 4 limbs. That man is not from high heaven's Yu family, but a true god from the upper bound. In front of the formation, Qin Mu suddenly relaxed and smiled without any sign of hiding any kind of nervousness. Your true body can't come down to the lower bound, can it? If it could, would you still be hiding like a fly in West Earth? Then since it isn't your true body, he stretched his hand forward, and his expression grew savage. Beating you to death isn't going to be any trouble. The man in the embroidered headband dispersed his magic power, and the corpse of the female divine arts practitioner of Mu family fell from the sky. Such a small child, yet already possessed the same unrealistic fantasy as the previous human emperor. Even though his sword had only cut off the arm of the female divine arts practitioner of Mu family, his sword will had passed through her whole body, dissolving and wiping out her primordial spirit. With his attainments in sword path, he didn't even need to hurt the opponent directly. Just his sword will alone was enough to crush the opponent's primordial spirit. Mu Yingxue formed her hands into fists but forced herself to restrain her anger. She didn't blow up. The one dead was her clansman, but against the mysterious Bago, she didn't dare to make a rash move. The man with the embroidered headband looked over at all the chiefs while behind him were the majestic mountains and true heaven palace that had an extraordinary air. He said leisurely, "Chiefs of West Earth, you guys chose to rebel for the true heaven palace's authority, but you have no idea that its authority comes from me. I'll give you guys a way out, if you return now and chop this human Emperor Qin's head off for me before sending it to true heaven palace, I'll let bygones be bygones." Qin Mu shivered when he saw that quite a number of the chiefs were swayed. The army of West Earth he had pulled over wasn't a piece of iron board, but was strung together by benefits. Even though most of the female chiefs were beautiful like flowers and Qin Mu even had quite some deep relationships with them, they were still akin to sect and cult masters of eternal peace. The beautiful women placed the benefit of their clan atop everything else. Personal emotions wouldn't warp the logical minds of those women. If they backed out because of the man's words, Qin Mu wouldn't be too surprised. Suddenly, Mu Yingxue shook the bells on her wrist which rang in the silence with a crisp sound and smiled. "All of you can withdraw, but my Mu family can't. What my Mu family owes to Xiong family has to be returned, otherwise my conscience will never be at ease." He looked at the others indifferently. "You Buchuan died in my bamboo city which will make it hard for me to escape censure, so why don't I just overthrow the rule of Yu family? My He family is not backing out as well." Liu Ruian hesitated for a moment, then looked at Liu Zhenqing who was on the small coffin beside her and licking it seriously. Noticing the attention, she suddenly raised her head to smile sweetly. "Just like Cult Master Qin said, he's just a clone of a true god and not difficult to kill. Only if the true god came down to the lower bound would it be too difficult. Mother, I have already accepted Sister Chia's hawthorn candy, so I have to do something for Xiong family. On top of that..." Her smile became even sweeter. "Who can ensure that you family won't find trouble with us after this? They are very petty, but if we get rid of them, Xiong family's mother and daughter will rule true heaven palace and even rely on our Liu family. The gain is bigger than the risk, so why not?" Qin Mu became at ease. Even though Liu Zhenqing looked like a little girl, she was actually an old fox. Her words sounded harmless, but she had mentioned what was on everyone's minds. With her sentence, the other influential families ascertained their decision, and Bago wouldn't be able to change their thoughts anymore. Among all the chiefs, maybe only Mu Yingxue was truly sincere about wanting to help Xiong Xiu and Xiong Chia, since she was redeeming herself. The others were more or less only concerned about their own benefits, but to Qin Mu, that was enough. The man with the embroidered headband smiled. "Human beings will die for riches, just as birds die for food. Even lucid, elegant, and refined women like you are also foolish and fail to live up to their bodies. Fine, since you guys want to die, I can only send all of you on your way." He was about to turn and leave, but he suddenly smiled and said, "Since Bago is already here, there's no need for you to leave." Countless huge rocks from behind her surged forward, toward the man. At the same time, almost all the chiefs also executed their own abilities. The mountain giants behind Fang Kadi raised huge mountain pillars, using mountain peaks as weapons to crash against the man with the embroidered headband. Luo Inu pulled out her sword to stab out, and countless flying swords followed closely after her sharp blade, which was sticking close to the mountain peak that was about to attack the man. Mu Yingxue flicked her finger, and Fu Yunxi pressed down heavily. Lightning burst forth, and the storm swept the poison Mu Yingxue had thrown toward the man. Liu Ruian and Liu Zhenqing undid the chains on the golden coffin, and they rose up like black flood dragons toward the man. The heads of West Earth's influential families held no regard for the rules of the martial world. They swarmed forward without any warning, wishing to prevent Bago from returning behind his army no matter what. Qin Mu nodded silently. Well done. The man with the embroidered headband walked toward True Heaven Palace as sword light flashed behind him, slicing apart everyone's attacks. Before his formation could close, the path was sliced open by his sword. The mountain pillars were sliced apart by the perfect sword light, and the storm was intercepted by the sword that cut across the sky. Chains were touched by the tip of the sword and sent back. Good sword skills. Based on sword skills, no one in West Earth is his opponent. He indeed has some good sword skills. Qin Mu's expression was solemn. The sword skill of the man with the embroidered headband had reached perfection and a realm so mysterious that even gods and spirits could not predict his moves. Chia, quickly activate the green dragon bead. Xiong Chia executed green dragon bead, and green light instantly shone brightly. Dragon roars rang out, and the sky filled with green light that rushed toward True Heaven Palace. Wherever it passed, everything was lignified, and even the mountain giants surrounding True Heaven Palace suddenly became stiff. Green light emanated from their bodies as countless green vines grew rapidly around them. The women on the top of those mountain giants went under the control of the green dragon bead at that instant. Pop, pop, pop. Tender sprouts and flowers grew out from their faces. Green dragon bead, one of the 4 spirit treasures of True Heaven Palace, had burst forth with astonishing power in the hands of the little girl. The man with the embroidered headband also suddenly froze when the green light shone on him. His body seemed to be lignifying as well. The power of green dragon bead was beyond imagination. At that moment, from the palaces in the Sea of Clouds, a few women of True Heaven Palace walked out. From each of their hands, a precious bead rose up. The 3 precious beads rose into the air, growing brighter and brighter. One of the beads had the soul of a tortoise and a snake, another the soul of a white tiger, while the last one glowed with flame. There was a divine bird roaming inside it. The 3 precious beads shone, and their lights clashed with the light of the green dragon bead. Dragon roars instantly reverberated as the green dragon flew out from the precious bead. The moment it did so, it grew incomparably huge. The dragon then flew to coil around the majestic mountains, creating an incomparably astonishing sight. In front of True Heaven Palace, the light of the 3 spirit treasures also became more and more vigorous. The white tiger, black tortoise, flying serpent, and vermilion bird flew out from the precious beads, too. The white tiger crouched down on a mountaintop and roared toward the sky. The vermilion bird gave a long cry and flapped its wings to spread a sea of fire. The black tortoise stepped on the sea, and it rumbled under its feet before rising into the sky while the flying serpent shuttled to and fro within it. The 3 women of True Heaven Palace had activated the other 3 spirit treasures to fight against Xiong Chia. They worked together to suppress the power of green dragon bead. The traces of lignification on the man rapidly faded away, and he gave a slight smile. The flying sword behind his back flew back into his sheath, and the man retreated back into True Heaven Palace. Get rid of them, he said from inside. The lignification of the women on the head of the mountain giants wore off when green dragon bead's power was suppressed. Thus, they also escaped. The green light on the mountain giants' bodies also faded away. They moved their huge bodies and swung mountain-shaped sharp swords to attack the influential families of West Earth. He shouted sternly, and the huge catapult automatically released. They swung their long arms and sent the rock humans flying. They were pitifully small compared to the mountain giants, but they still stretched out when they were thrown and pounced on their larger counterparts. Flames burst forth in midair, and the rock humans were shattered before they could land. They were destroyed under the attacks of the mountain giants' huge weapons. Cult legacy treasures had burst forth with terrifying power in the hands of the mountain giants, turning the rock humans into powder. They covered the ground in a layer of dust. Yet there were still quite a number of rock humans who had landed on the mountain giants' bodies and scaled up to their heads. The disciples of True Heaven Palace executed their divine arts to their limits as though they were facing great enemies when faced with such an attack. They pulled out the spirits from their opponents' bodies, making many of them return to a pile of rocks that rolled down to the ground. Whoosh! Heavy rain began to fall, and green-colored droplets landed as lightning and thunder scoured the sky. It was the poison storm created by the divine arts practitioners of Mu and Fu families. Within it, even the crackling lightning was green in color and contained poison. The lightning mixed with the rain and struck down on the mountaintop of every one of the mountain giants. More women of True Heaven Palace flew out, and countless spirit weapons flew forth. They were golden and silver bracelets of all sizes that spread among the mountains. The spinning golden and silver bracelets attracted lightning and rainwater, binding them inside themselves before sending them down the mountainsides. The dark clouds in the sky shook and tornadoes descended, twisting their bodies as they swept toward the gold and silver bracelets. The woman who was controlling Black Tortoise Bead activated it, and the sea poured down on the dark clouds, swallowing them whole along with the lightning and tornadoes. Kill! Shouts came from Qin Mu's side, and the huge catapult strode several miles forward before squatting down. Numerous women jumped into their huge frames and were slung into the fight by them. Numerous mountain giants went forth to clash with the mountain giants that guarded True Heaven Palace. Tens of thousands of disciples stood on them and countless spirit weapons flew out to fight with the disciples of True Heaven Palace. Many vines stretched out from the sky and swept toward the mountain giants. The women of Shi family stepped on the vines to travel past the mountains, attacking the women of True Heaven Palace while the vines coiled around the mountains. Rumble! A pagoda-shaped mountain pressed down and crushed countless women of Shi family. However, no one had the time to feel sorrow. Those still alive took control of the long rivers that were like flood dragons and sent them at the mountains. They clashed with the waterfall and long river that came down from the mountaintop. There were countless water giants standing up from the big river as well, wielding knives and blades made from mysterious ice. The group pounced on the women before them. The land before True Heaven Palace had become a huge Azura's battlefield, and the warriors in it were the charming women. Fatty Dragon, protect Chia! Qin Mu jumped onto He's stone that was floating in midair. The huge bamboo city had already separated into pieces and become a flood of huge rocks that rose into the sky. This video will end here.